Welcome, everybody. My name is Carly Graham Garcia. I'm the Executive Director of the Feliciano Center for Entrepreneurship and Innovation at Montclair State University, and welcome to Weekly Women Entrepreneurship. We are so lucky to be joined by Alex West Steinman, co-founder and CEO of the Coven in Minneapolis, with multiple locations, which she's going to tell us more about. Alex, thanks so much for joining us. What is the Coven?
Oh, thanks for having me. The Coven is a community and workspace for women, non-binary, and trans folks. We started as a physical location in Minneapolis and have expanded. I'm calling in today from our St. Paul location. It's our second spot. But we're really a network of spaces. So that could be seen as a co-working space, but we're also a community. So we have virtual options for folks to be able to connect and plug in, especially now that we're all kind of disparate and spread and at home, many of us. But really what we offer is kind of events and programming around personal professional development to help folks really step into their power, whether that's launching their new business, scaling a business, or even kind of just asking for more money in their existing job. Our membership is really diverse from age, race, industry, and socioeconomic. So we have folks who, like about half of our membership identify as entrepreneurs and the other half identify as corporate climbers. And so they're folks from really a variety of different places, which is why we don't call ourselves a co-working space, because many people don't actually work here. They just come here to connect with one another and be in community together.
That's great. And since we have a global audience, tell us more about what those virtual memberships are, especially in this moment where folks are connecting and looking for connection over the internet. How you'd already been doing that. How are you, what does your global membership look like compared obviously to coming and sitting in with you in person?
Sure. So let me tell you a funny story. We've always wanted to launch a virtual membership from day one, but wanted to do it right and didn't have the right capacity in order to do that while we were kind of just getting our spaces up and running. We've only been around for about 2.5 years. And so when COVID hit here, which if you're familiar with where we are, we're in the middle of the country. So it was kind of like a storm brewing on the coast and we could see it coming, but didn't really understand what it was like, you know, back in March. Remember back in March? It feels like a decade ago. And so we had just opened our St. Paul location about 6 weeks prior to having to close our spaces down temporarily just to make sure that everybody was safe and, you know, the stay-at-home order that was here where everybody kind of went into quarantine. Within 24 hours of shutting down, we actually turned around a virtual membership, which essentially allowed us to reach a global audience. And so, you know, we went from hosting about 2 to 3 events a week in our physical spaces to 2 to 3 events a day virtually. Lots of things going on. So kind of daily events during the week that keep people plugged in and connected to one another as we kind of navigate what does it mean to own a business, to grow a business, to be a parent right now, to being a single person, dating, like all of those things that we have questions about, not quite sure how to navigate in 2020. We've been able to tackle with our membership. And so we have members as far as Scotland and as close as like next door in St. Paul, all with relevant content to help people stay plugged in and connected to one another.
Wow, that's excellent. So tell us a little bit about your journey as an entrepreneur and also as a co-founder. So your other co-founders, also all female, have backgrounds in advertising as well as in politics. So tell us a little bit about how you all got together and decided to do this, and then what you've kind of learned along the way, because you mentioned to me before we jumped into the conversation that you're actually sitting at the front desk of the Coven's location today in St. Paul. And so you're not in a back room, you're front and center, you know, doing the work in addition to doing the strategy. So tell us about your journey with your co-founders and kind of what you've, you know, learned about running a business along the way.
Yeah, absolutely. And like I said, I might have to just like hello and help somebody at some point. But just to give you kind of a brief background, the 4 of us met in advertising. We were all kind of working in different areas of the industry. And in addition to our day jobs as, you know, PR folks, strategy folks, operational folks, we were really focused on helping women advance in their careers, seeing so many folks like have babies and then have to opt out or hit the director level and never get beyond that because of the way that industry is set up. It's very patriarchal, it's extremely racist. And so In addition to that, we also were focusing on helping folks of color not just get into the industry. There's a lot of intern programs out there, but there's nothing really to help them advance beyond that. And so we often see them even getting stopped at the internship level, which is a major issue. And so for us, we're kind of working through like, how do we develop programs and really invest in that development of folks of color and women. And, you know, while we got a lot of like high fives and accolades from folks, we had started a nonprofit. I was one of the co-founders of a nonprofit called Minneapolis Mad Women, which is an industry group for women. And that's where the four of us kind of met. And we started getting really frustrated by not actually getting dollar investment in the growth and development of folks of color and women. And so we just decided to create the world that we believe that women deserve to live in and work in and play in and advance in. And we dreamed up this type of space. We did a summer of focus groups, interviewed hundreds of women, better understanding what do they want out of a community like this? What does representation mean to them? How would they need to feel seen, validated, heard, understood in a physical workspace? And honestly, it was kind of challenging because many women were like, I don't deserve something so beautiful, or I don't deserve to invest in myself, or didn't see the need for a co-working space. And so that was really where we kind of like, we saw a lot of like dissonance with folks. But once we kind of hit the niche of like, this is more than a workspace, like this is a community, this is where you can engage with people. We have like, you know, community organizers and politicians sitting next to like VPs of banks, and like they're collaborating and they're working together. And we have people who find their co-founder because they were like, hey, I forgot my charger, can I borrow yours? And the next thing you know, they're starting a new business together. And so it's those types of like serendipitous moments and things that like only could happen at a space like this, that would put such a unique group of people together. And that's like really what the magic of this space is. It's all about community and being like true community, and uncovering it, because it's always been here. It's just not, we haven't always had a place to gather, particularly women. So that's kind of how we started. We were on I Fund Women, which Karen Kahn, the CEO of, is a dear friend of ours now. And we decided we needed to crowdfund because none of us are independently wealthy. And so we basically, you know, this was kind of like our only chance, right? We weren't going to get approved for a loan from a bank. Like none of us had like just rich parents who could just dole out, you know, whatever. So we ended up, you know, doing it this way and raised $350,000 on the platform.
Wow.
Yeah,
Okay, let's pause there.
yeah.
That's the largest crowdfunding campaign that I've actually heard of so far. I mean, some of them have been relatively small, the founders that I've spoken with, between like 10 and 50K, $350,000 from all over the country and also all over the world.
All over the country. I would say the most coming from the Twin Cities area, because we were opening like one space in Minneapolis. And so we were basically raising our founding memberships. And so we ended up being profitable on day one because we had $350,000 in the bank, and we're able to like hit the ground running. We staffed it mostly with ourselves and a few others kind of that we brought on early in the process, when I realized I couldn't, you know, raise money and scrub the toilets at the same time. It took a lot. You know, I think oftentimes women think are more conservative with their dollars, which I think is smart, and also makes us really cash efficient business owners. But also sometimes it puts us in a place where we limit ourselves with like how quickly we can scale and grow, because we're not always able to take the risk, or can't calculate the risk as well. And so that's something that I've had to learn kind of along the way. I think that was part of your question as I meander a bit, was really understanding how do we develop this like bias for risk taking and action. And we developed it really quickly, because once we started bringing on staff, we realized we had a little bit more capacity to focus on corporate sponsorships, or a little bit more capacity to focus on what would it look like if we had 2 locations. And, you know, the investment in a staff member was also an investment in myself and in my time and in my team's time. And so we just started kind of like thinking a little bit about like, it's a lot of like chicken and egg, like we should raise the money before we can bring on a staff member, but also I can't raise the money if I don't bring on a staff member. And so like, it was kind of like this process. but that's ultimately like, that's what we're creating here for our members, is a space where you can feel safe to like take that leap or make a jump or try something new or take a risk on yourself, or take a risk that might, you know, you might not have a safety net for. But what we try to build here is like, we're your safety net. We're your place where you can dream really big and make a leap if you have to.
Yeah, that's tremendous. I love that. And digging into risk taking is something we talk about with our students and our entrepreneurs that we support through some of our work. So I love that you just said that. I want to talk a little bit about the scaling element that you mentioned. So, so in sort of the customer discovery phase, you had this pot of money to be able to begin. Plus, you also had, you know, standing at the ready clientele, which is amazing. So you'd mentioned you have a location in Minneapolis, a location in St. Paul, the virtual membership. Talk to us a little bit about your growth strategy, and then if you will, tell us a little bit about the childcare that you offer in the St. Paul location, because that I think is a really unique differentiator. And other traditional co-working spaces, I know you don't lump yourselves into that category, but that has been one differentiator for them. How are you doing it differently? And as you continue to grow, sort of, will you keep that element of your offering?
Yeah, so childcare is something we wanted to offer from day one, but needed to kind of think through, you know, the MVP of anything is not like the best and biggest thing that you could dream up, right? And so in Minneapolis, it didn't work in our physical space, but in St. Paul, we built this space so that we could have childcare. So we found a space that had had area that could be childcare friendly. And so we built a room that is essentially like, you know, lots of soft cushions and that kind of stuff, lots of good toys in there. But then we partner with a local college nannies and tutors, which is kind of a national franchise organization. I believe it was actually started here in St. Paul, Minnesota. But it's a pretty cool organization where, you know, our members can contract directly with a nanny or a sitter. They're kind of like on call. And you just call like 24 hours ahead of time, and then the nanny meets you here. We bill you directly through your membership, and then we pay college nannies and tutors. So like that's kind of the back end of it.
Wow.
But it just made sense because women are so often like saddled with both the, you know, like the work at your paycheck job, you're saddled with the work at your home job, which ends up being like child rearing or caregiving to somebody else. Maybe that's a parent or a grandparent, or in my case, it's a grandparent too. But I also have 2 children, and so I have to like work both ends of those. And you're kind of burning the candle, like you're just lighting the whole candle on fire. Like so it's not even on both ends. And so childcare like made sense for our members, and a lot of people join because we have it, even if they don't use it very frequently. It's just a good resource because our parents are on site here, and so it's like a cheaper option than hiring a full-time nanny for yourself, because you can use it for a few hours a day in our space, and it's rather affordable. We always offer scholarship hours for anything that we do, whether that's scholarship for a membership, a scholarship for programming and events that are maybe more premium offering, and then we also offer scholarship hours for childcare if somebody can't afford it. We always want to try to make it work.
That's great. That's tremendous. So Inc. magazine had profiled the Coven, and you in particular, around your focus around growth in underdog cities. And I think that was maybe terminology they had quoted you saying. Tell us more about that strategy. I mean, I think it's getting a lot of attention now, talking to you from a coast where we're seeing that a lot of people sort of say, hey, maybe we could have a bit of a, you know, a bit more space, a bit of a nicer life in a less dense, you know, city than New York City. Tell us more about what that means, and then also your own growth. Are you looking at these underdog cities?
Okay, so our expansion plan has always been to move through the middle and southern parts of the country where the cost of doing business is often much more affordable than on the coast, and yet we can still charge the same premiums that, you know, other places are offering on the coast. And so we've actually found it to be much more cost efficient, and we can scale quickly when the country reopens through those spaces. There's a ton of pent-up demand there because there aren't a lot of communities like ours that have both the deep community like roots and deep community understanding of what's happening locally, while also having the ability to have kind of like global scale or scale of resources. So we can bring in folks like a Karen Khan like a, Eric Reese from the Lean Startup, like an Arlen Hamilton, and like have a conversation in the middle of Minneapolis or St. Paul or Nashville or Denver or, Savannah, Georgia. Like we're looking at places that like don't have communities like this and want access to kind of a global network and also access to each other locally, because I think that's really important too. Like we can have conversations with celebrities all day, but like I think what's more important is like, how are you building community with your neighbors? Like, do you even know what your neighbor does? And how can you like make the most impact on the ground where you are? And so that's really where our focus is building deep relationships locally, and then offering the, kind of global reach that we can have.
Yeah, that's great. That's really great. So let's talk a little bit about place, because you are in Minneapolis, or today you're in St. Paul, but you are at the seat of a major city that the murder of George Floyd has sparked so much conversation globally.
Yeah.
Now in a moment of real reckoning around sort of racial inequality, which we've been in before and we're in it again. People are talking about it. And of course, we're in the middle of a global health crisis. So tell us a little bit about how the Coven has supported your own community right outside your door in this very dynamic moment where the place that you're in really kind of sparked so much of what we're talking about right now, and kind of how it relates to your business, because I think people will find that really, really interesting. You are building community, so how are you serving it kind of in this moment?
Yeah, so I mean, I think the way we talk about community is by uncovering it, because so much of the community has already been here. So we're not really building anything. We're just providing space to hold space for folks who need to gather. And so from a like a support perspective, George Floyd was murdered on Monday. The video was surfaced that evening and into Tuesday morning. Obviously, it was a really heavy moment for the city and for our community, for the whole world. Everybody was in mourning. And our location in Minneapolis is in an area called the North Loop. And so we were a little bit further away from where the actual incident happened, as well as where the protests were, but we are very close to like the federal building. We're literally like tucked almost inside of the Federal Reserve building. And so there's a lot of like larger areas. The Hennepin Bridge, we're right near 35, where that truck kind of ran down the middle of the road on one of the days. So, I mean, we're close to a lot of the action that was happening, a lot of the protests and a lot of the uprising. And so on Thursday evening of that week, we got a call from Women for Political Change, which is a local political organizing group run by young, queer, Black and brown women. And they called us and were like, hey, can we use your space for a distribution site for the protesters? We need to make sure that they have like milk of magnesium, and make sure that they have goggles, and make sure that they have shields and all the things that they needed. And we said, of course. We were supposed to open our Minneapolis location the following week at limited capacity. But what we decided to do is just delay the opening of it so that we could really support our community. So from that weekend, we started distributing protest supplies, and then it soon turned into food and supplies needed in the communities that had been essentially burned to the ground. So like there's places where people don't have cars or don't have access to get to another city because their grocery store is now closed or burned. And so we were trying to make sure that people had access to those things. So we did a donation drive out of our space, and from there we would load up cars or vans and then send out to those donation pickup sites. So we ended up shipping, I think it was hundreds of thousands of goods, but it was over like 500 cars over the course of 4 weeks, which was pretty amazing to see how quickly our community, our volunteers, our staff just turned on a dime to make sure that our community could eat, that our community had diapers. And it was such an incredible effort, but it also like brought up a lot of things like, well, why can't Target help with this? Why can't our government feed our families? And why are small businesses responsible for this work? And so we, that also brings up a lot of work that like it brought up a lot that we have a lot to do,
Right.
I think one of the most shocking things over the course of, even in those first 2 weeks was the presence of the National Guard. The governor deployed the entire state National Guard for the first time since like World War II. And essentially like felt like on its own citizens, essentially. And so our building is right in the Federal Reserve building, essentially like right in kind of like an L, and then we're like right in the middle. And they were essentially like parked their giant Humvees and had like artillery weapons and all sorts of things like on the sidewalk where we were collecting donations. And so it was very real to, the intensity, it was scary for a lot of our, volunteers and things, but we just kept going because there was no other way to do it. And we felt like this was our duty, and what we could do is we have space, we have time, we have people, and we can mobilize quickly. So, again, we donated, over hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of goods across the Twin Cities to make sure that our families could eat and find the supplies they needed for the first couple months.
Wow, Alex, that's tremendous. Thank you for sharing all of that with us, especially, for those of us who haven't experienced that yet in the cities or the communities that we live in. That's really powerful. I have two more questions related. One, so you just described a really powerful moment sort of as an entrepreneur, right? You probably never expected to have done the things you've done as a business owner and as an entrepreneur over the last couple of weeks, because the world's been turned upside down. Just in building your business and sort of hedging risk, as you talked about a little bit before, the crowdfunding success that you had, any nuggets of advice that you'd have for kind of early stage entrepreneurs, people who have kind of this idea, who maybe have friends and potential co-founders as you did? What are the do's, what are the don'ts based on your own experience?
I think the first and the most important thing is that you know your audience, and that you are really connected to your community, whatever that means. So that could mean your audience and people who are going to buy your goods. That could also mean like other entrepreneurs in the area. The reason we've been able to mobilize so quickly, both with the drop site and with our virtual membership and with opening the second location within a year and a half of the last one. I mean, all of those things are because we had deep relationships and understanding of our members, of our community leaders, of our organizers, so that we can call them and do things like, we need to we want to open a second location because there is demand for it. Is there help from the city? And we were able to mobilize that quickly with a grant and a loan from the city of St. Paul. The same thing with, the community organizers calling us to say, hey, can we use your space? Like that doesn't happen to most businesses if you don't have a deep relationship with folks on the ground. And so that just takes time. I think like you can do all of these things in tandem or, side by side. You can do, relationship building while you're starting to build your business. But I think it's just so important for you to be listening constantly and to be constantly understanding what is the community pulse? What is the audience pulse? What does your audience need? Because the more you're able to respond to that, and I don't mean like in a reactive response, I just mean like respond as a business owner to what your audience needs, the more you're going to be able to build exactly what they want.
Yeah, no, that's great. That's great advice. And that really resonates with us. So one final question for you, and then we'll let you get back to running your business. So behind you, there are these very beautiful, very dominant pink posters. Which is which? And the Coven, for those who don't know, is a group or gathering of witches. So in choosing this word that has some stereotypes around sort of women, did you do it intentionally? And kind of what was the thought process around sort of reclaiming this word?
Yeah, well, that's a great question. It's one we get a lot. So the first, we had the name before we had the business. We affectionately called the four of us the Coven. Only one of us is a true practicing Wiccan. And we always say you have to guess which one, but it's Liz. So it's Liz and you'll know it right away. But anyways, when you look at the dictionary, like you said, the Coven means a group of, very specifically 13 witches, or a gathering of people. If you look up like the origin of the word, it really means to gather or to convene. And that's really what we're doing, is we see some power in the magic and energy that happens when women and non-binary and trans folks come together in one space. That could be virtual or physical. But we see that power and that intentionality that happens when people come together, those sparks of like magic happenstance. And we really wanted to take back the word that does have some negative connotations to it often, where, you're called a witch, or women are seen as like evil for stepping into their power, or they get called a bitch because they're, quick-witted or smart, or just don't want to put up with your bullshit. I don't know if I can swear on this, but but I feel like that is the energy we wanted to put out there. We don't mind that it has a little bit of teeth, but we also hope that it is a cause for pause for folks to like rethink it a little bit more and think about like, what does it mean to gather, and who are my coven? Who is my group of people who support and uplift me no matter what?
That's great. Alex West Steinman, thanks so much for being with us, co-founder and CEO of the Coven, coming to us from St. Paul and also in Minneapolis, also virtual, and many more locations to come. Tell our audience before we go, how can they find you, either your website or on social?
Yeah, check us out at thecoven.com. We have virtual memberships for just $25 a month. We also have our community funded membership, which is open. So for every 5 paid members, we gift one to someone in the community, prioritizing folks from underestimated communities. So definitely check that out. It's up and live right now. So it's just at thecoven.com. You'll find it there. And in addition to that, we have a great Instagram. Check us out, thecoven.co. You find us on Twitter at thecovenco.
Great. Alex, thank you. Thanks for spending time with us and teaching us more about what you've built.
Thank you. Have a good one.
Take care.